As the Dark Knight, I vowed to fight crime with all the powers at my disposal. But as Bruce Wayne, multi-billionaire industrialist, I vowed to always serve global capitalism by any means necessary. It's a shy one.
Master Bruce?
Not now, Alfred!
Sorry to bother you, sir, but Commissioner Gordon is on the phone.
Tell him to wait!
Come on.
I hate to rush you, but there's been an explosion at Arkham Asylum.
I'm busy!
It's quite urgent. Every single inmate has escaped. The Joker, the Penguin, the Riddler, Bane...
Later, Alfred! I'm serving capitalism!
How so, sir?
I'm making guano!
Oh, hi! I didn't see you there. Well, of course not, I'm a bat. Or at least, I'm LARPing as one. I didn't hear you there. Welcome to my cave. To celebrate the release of the new Batman movie, and boost my video in the algorithm, I thought I'd talk about bats. Specifically, about bats doing their business. And the business that people did with that business. Business that proved so valuable, people went to war over it. But to put this war in its proper context, let's first talk about capitalism's ecology. Now, that phrase might sound a bit weird and contradictory. Isn't ecology all about nature and stuff? And doesn't capitalism destroy nature? Oh good, you watched my videos already. So how can capitalism have an ecology? Well, ecology is the study of the relationship between different species and between species and their environments. It's all about how nutrients, energy, materials, and minerals move around in ecosystems in ways both cooperative, birds and bees, and competitive, prey and predator. In short, it's the study of the web of life and the interactions therein. Humans are a species, and like all species, they interact with other species and with the environment. Humans hunt, breed, eat, experiment on, and sometimes snuggle with other animals, and they shape the landscape and use natural resources to grow food, make room for livestock, build dwellings, factories, roads, commodities, etc. Despite some humans harboring illusions about being separate from and even superior to nature, humans are unavoidably a part of the web of life. But humans entangle themselves in that... Okay, I was playing with the idea of doing this Dracula pose for the whole video, but I find that restrictive, so yeah. Humans entangle themselves in this web in an interesting way. So interesting that there's a whole academic field called human ecology. Humans don't just interact with nature on their own, they do so collectively through complex social and economic systems. Like capitalism, a profit-driven market-based system where a very small group of people own almost everything and make everybody else work for them so that they can one day finally own everything. It's basic economics. Speaking of, the word economics is etymologically related to ecology. The common root is the Greek word oikos, which means house. Ecology literally means the study of the house, while economics means the law of the house. And you can understand house here as the earth. Do anyone smell burning? Economics is all about flows of resources, materials, energy, labor, capital, commodities, and so on. Everything we do in our economy uses natural resources of some kind. Despite some economists harboring illusions about the economy functioning above and beyond the natural world, economics should arguably be considered a branch of human ecology. Labor is particularly important. The people owning almost everything can't make a profit on their own, despite the claims of so-called self-made billionaires. To achieve their dream of owning everything, they depend on other people working for them and being paid less than the value of their work. But there's something interesting about labor. Karl Marx once said, "One morning I shot an elf into my pajamas. How he had gotten into my pajamas, I'll never know." Wait, I think I mixed up my Marxes here. Oh yes, right. Groucho Marx wrote in volume 1 of his seminal work Das Kapital, "Labor is a process between man and nature, a process by which man mediates, regulates, and controls the metabolism between himself and nature." Labor is how humans interact with nature. So, when the people owning almost everything exploit labor, they're not just exploiting workers, but nature as well. So yes, it makes sense to understand capitalism and ecology together. Capitalism is not just part of an ecology, but is an ecology, a set of relationships integrating power, capital, and nature. Granted, it's a dysfunctional and destructive ecology. For one thing, capitalism needs to grow and expand indefinitely and at a constantly increasing speed that's at odds with the regenerative capabilities of nature. And the boom and bust cycles inherent to the system means that capitalism jumps from one resource to another as they stop being profitable or get depleted, whichever comes first. For instance, in the 1400s, Madeira started off as a source of wood for shipbuilding. Then someone figured out it was more profitable to grow sugar, but to fuel the sugar processing, they deforested almost the whole island, which is quite ironic since Ilha de Madeira means island of wood. Then they moved on to wine and the slave trade, and today tourism reigns supreme. And of course, the flights needed to get there fuels global heating, which should worry an island region where it gets pretty damn hot in the summer. The guiding principle of capitalism's ecology is cheapness, a set of strategies to manage relations between capitalism and the web of life by temporarily fixing capitalism's crises. Cheap is not the same as low cost, though that's part of it. Cheap is a strategy, a practice of violence that mobilizes all kinds of work, human and animal, botanical and geological, with as little compensation as possible. Cheap is a process through which capitalism transmutes these undenominated relationships of life-making into circuits of production and consumption, in which these relations come to have as low a price as possible. It's always a short-term strategy, and cheapness has always been a battleground. Capitalism is profit-driven, and thus the mantra is invest as little as possible and profit as greatly as possible. Money, commodity, money prime, etc. To facilitate the invest as little as possible bit, it's strategic to make some things, perhaps 7 of them, cheap, by the power of state, empire, finance, and military if need be. Nature? Do some imperialism and enclosure here and there and you get cheap nature. Labor? Do some imperialism and enclosure here and there and you get cheap labor. Food? Do some imperialism and enclosure here and there. Yes, definitely make food cheap. Because let's say, hypothetically, for the sake of argument, you're a capitalist, specifically in 19th century Britain. Once you've hired your labor force, you want to pay them as little as possible, sure, but not so little that they actually starve. Not only because that will diminish the quality of the labor you bought, but also, worst case scenario, you get revolts and revolutions, and that's just not a good investment climate. So for the love of freedom, equality, property, and Bentham, make food cheap. In the 19th century, the industrialization of agriculture was well underway in Britain. Because of this, the amount of labor necessary in farming went down, which was great for the factories in the cities because they got an influx of new workers. This left behind small farms that consolidated into bigger farms that now had growing markets for food in cities because of all the people moving there. But there was a problem brewing. You see, healthy soils are ecosystems unto their own, teeming with life. And not just worms and beetles and microorganisms, but also minerals and nutrients like potassium, ammonia, nitrates, nitrogen, carbon, and more. Plants need this stuff to grow. In healthy soil, plants provide sugar carbons to the soil through photosynthesis, while the soil provides nutrients and minerals to the plants in a mutually beneficial relationship. However, if you try to squeeze as much produce as quickly as possible from the soil, like you're incentivized to do in a profit-driven market-based system, you risk exhausting the soil of crucial nutrients. The same system that constantly demands more out of workers does the same to the soil. To quote Karl Marx again, "I don't want to belong to any club that will accept people like me as a member." Sorry, I meant Groucho. All progress in capitalist agriculture is a progress in the art not only of robbing the worker, but of robbing the soil. All progress in increasing the fertility of the soil for a given time is a progress towards ruining the more long-lasting sources of that fertility. Capitalist production simultaneously undermines the original sources of all wealth, the soil and the worker. British agriculture faced a crisis of soil fertility in the 19th century. To counter this, they started importing food from around Europe, including Ireland, exhausting their soils in the process. Justus von Liebig, a German chemist who was a pioneer in the study of the composition and health of soil, compared Britain to a vampire, sucking the rest of Europe dry. Things were looking hairy, but then they found a solution just off the coast of Peru. And now finally we get to how the business of bats caused an imperialist war. This tale takes us to the Chincha Islands, where for thousands of years upwards of 60 million seabirds would get together, hang out, eat anchovies, do their business. Wait, birds? Birds? I thought it was bats. I need to check my notes. I'm so stupid. I misremembered the story. You see, the word guano can refer to either bird droppings or bat droppings. And I thought it was bat guano that caused the war I'm about to talk about. I was so committed to this being about bats because I want to do the YouTube thing of timing the release of the video with that of a popular movie for clicks and views, but now the title and the first half of this video is a bait and switch, and nobody has done a bait and switch on YouTube before. This is embarrassing. I'll lose credibility, respect, subscribers. Like, I made drawings, not very good ones, admittedly, but this is way overexposed. I tried, not very well, admittedly, but still, what am I gonna do? Wait, I think I can make a decent segue here. Yes. Michael Keaton played Batman in the two Tim Burton movies from the 80s and 90s. And then, 20 years later, he starred in Birdman. Yes, got it. It's an organic connection. It's practically ecological. Back to the story. But first, let's get out of this cave. Go out in the open, get some fresh air, and smell the ocean breeze. On the Chincha Islands, 60 million seabirds would live, eat, shit. And due to climatic factors, it rains very little in that part of Peru, their droppings didn't simply wash away, but instead accumulated and accumulated over thousands of years into a literal mountain of bird poop, over 100 feet high. 100 feet is 30.5 meters. This poop, this guano, was rich in phosphates, nitrogen, and ammonia, which, as we saw, is good for the soil. Indigenous people in Peru had used this potent fertilizer for hundreds of years, but never in huge quantities. Then came the British. Always an ominous phrase in world history. Peru was in debt to Britain because of an independence war that for once wasn't fought against the British. Instead, Peru had gained independence from the Spanish Empire in 1826. Peru found a way to pay off its debt by selling guano contracts to Britain, and because of this, Britain would dominate the global trade in guano. The first shipments of Peruvian guano reached Britain in 1841, and it was an instant success. It was excellent fertilizer, so excellent that people called it white gold. I wonder if this is what Karl Marx had in mind when he said, "I get credit all the time for things I never said." Wait, I meant Groucho, I keep doing this. Money may be muck, but muck is not money. Anyway, soon everyone wanted this stuff. Ships started flocking to these islands. Hundreds of them at a time were waiting to load guano on board. At the peak of the trade, Peru exported over 500,000 tons of guano a year, and it provided as much as 80% of Peru's state revenue. Peru got stinking rich. Yes, I just went there. This, of course, couldn't last. The guano was extracted way faster than it could regenerate. It didn't help that they either drove away or slaughtered the birds on the island. Talk about killing the goose laying the golden shits. As already mentioned, you can't do anything with a natural resource without labor. What they did was bring cheap labor in from China. It was cheap because China was in a social and political turmoil at the time, in part because of the Opium War. God damn you, Britain! Working on these islands was a nightmare, and the next minute or so is going to be a bit messed up. Between 1849 and 1874, 90,000 Chinese coolies, which sounds a bit like a slur, but I'm pretty sure it's not, were shipped to the islands. A tenth of them died during passage alone. Some of them by jumping off the ship to escape the conditions on board, which were comparable to those of the transatlantic slave trade. Things didn't get much better on the islands. 200 to 800 of them worked there at a time, each made to carry 5 tons of guano a day. If they didn't meet their quota, they were physically punished, either by flogging or whipping or being tied up and left in the sun. Many of them died from overwork or for breathing in too much of the guano dust, or because they starved. Yes, I said earlier that you, the 19th century British capitalists, don't want to starve your workforce, but really that's only if your workers have rights and stuff. If workers are cheap and abundant enough, then who cares if they die? Not the people investing in this crap. The Chinese laborers, or slaves, let's not mince words here, were expendable. Lives? Do some imperialism and racism here and there and you get cheap lives. Workers dropping off dead on the islands were quickly replaced with new ones. Even the shipmasters bringing them to shore, hardened men who oversaw the horrible conditions on board, even they were horrified at the cruelties they saw inflicted on the Chinese, whose dead bodies they described as floating around the islands. Working on the Chincha Islands was a fate worse than slavery. To prevent revolt among the workers, the Peruvian employers got help from the British to import opium. God damn you, Britain! So, anywho, war. In 1864, Spain, who was still a bit pissy about the independence war they lost almost 40 years earlier and still didn't officially recognize Peru's independence, seized the islands. Peru was like, "Qué?" and allied with Bolivia, Chile, and Ecuador to fight the Spanish, leading to the 1864-66 Chincha Islands War, also known as the Guano War. Spain lost, in great part because the US, who also liked them some Peruvian guano, was tired of Spain's bullshit and threatened to get involved if Spain didn't GTFO. Although every death is a tragedy, it wasn't a big war in terms of death counts. Only 300 people died in the war, which means that the normal everyday operation of the guano extraction on the islands was more deadly than the war fought over the control of it. Still, what the soldiers and the laborers had in common was that they died over literal shit. By the 1870s, the guano deposits on the islands were running out, which set the stage for another war. To make up for dwindling revenues, Peru set their sights on nitrate resources in the Atacama Desert, where today, incidentally, the textile industry dumped tens of thousands of tons of unsold clothing every year, but I digress. The problem was that these nitrate resources were situated around the then vague and ill-defined borders of Peru, Bolivia, and Chile, and they all wanted in the action. So a little more than a decade after they allied against the Spanish, they went to war with each other. The Pacific War, 1879 to 1884, was much deadlier than the previous war, with 25,000 dead. Chile won, or really the British won. British finance was a decisive factor in the outcome of the war, because they had a lot of it and they needed to use it somehow. Money? Do some imperialism and enclosure here and there and you get cheap money. While Chileans, Peruvians, and Bolivians exchanged bullets on the field of battle, the English bought up the nitrate bonds, thanks to credits graciously afforded them by the Bank of Valparaiso and other Chilean banks. The soldiers were fighting for them without knowing it. So, the plan was originally to finish and upload this closer to the premiere of The Batman, but my laptop and editing software had different ideas. The damn video won't render properly. Most of the video is fine, but the ending just won't come out. Like a reluctant shit. See what I did there? A call back to the beginning where Batman has a shy one? Maybe it's a sign. I wasn't happy with the original ending anyway, so let's do it over. By the way, this is my beard after almost 2 weeks of growth. Bask in my masculine glory. So, let's recap the chain of events. To uphold the regime of cheap food, which underwrote cheap labor, which facilitated profits, and still does, British agriculture intensified. This depleted the soil of nutrients, leading to increased food imports from the rest of Europe, effectively outsourcing an ecological problem abroad, a pattern we still see today. This outsourcing reached global proportions with the guano rush on the Chincha Islands, leading to a war, countless abuses of workers and tens of thousands of them dead, and of course environmental destruction. The mighty Bird Poop Mountain, truly a natural monument to what the collective effort of billions of birds can achieve over thousands of years, shrank from over 30 meters to just 1 in a couple of decades. In the same time span, the bird population collapsed from 60 million to just 4 million. This shows the terrifying power of capitalism to transform the natural world. As already mentioned, everything we do in our economy uses natural resources. Indeed, to quote Vandana Shiva, effectively, growth measures the conversion of nature into cash and commons into commodities. Nature shrinks as capital grows. Something that Stefan et al.'s 2015 paper, The Trajectory of the Anthropocene, The Great Acceleration, demonstrates quite forcefully with these graphs. That's where the flows of resources, minerals, materials, energy, capital, and labor inherent to capitalism's ecology are taking us. yet more terrifying, to quote Karl Marx again, "Gentlemen, he may talk like an idiot and look like an idiot, but don't let that fool you. He really is an idiot." Wait, Groucho! There's like a short circuit in my brain that makes me mix them up every time. When we buy in order to sell, we begin and end with the same thing: money, exchange value. And thereby the movement becomes interminable. Money ends the movement only to begin it again. The circulation of money as capital is an end in itself, and therefore has no limits. Money, commodity, money pride, etc., 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 etc. Capitalism just keeps going, no matter the consequences to humans, animals, and nature. It doesn't end. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And the story of this video certainly doesn't end with the guano trade. The depletion of this resource itself amounted to a crisis needing a fix, a cheapening. This fix was found in 1910 with the discovery of the Haber-Bosch process, a method of extracting nitrogen from the atmosphere, which led to the invention of chemical fertilizers. New technologies are often praised for solving ecological problems, but they tend to create new ones, and chemical fertilizers are no exception. For one thing, nitrogen runoff from farms often end up in the ocean and create oxygen-depleted dead zones. For two things, the Haber-Bosch process is very energy-intensive. Energy? Do some imperialism and enclosure. Most of that energy, of course, comes from fossil fuels, and we know what they do by now. For three things, and speaking of global heating, nitrogen fertilizers contribute to emissions of nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas that's 265 times stronger than CO2 and also depletes the ozone layer for good measure. For four things, chemical fertilizers contribute to soil depletion, the very problem they were invented to fix. They become less efficient over time. Over the past 4 decades, as of 2015, the efficiency of nitrogen fertilizers has decreased by 2/3 and their consumption per hectare has increased by 7 times. So, chemical fertilizers, not ideal. It's a fix approaching a crisis. Really, the whole global food system built up from industrial agriculture is an expression of capitalism's ecology, full of cheapening short-term fixes with disastrous ecological effects that systematically deplete and erode the soil. Luckily, there are solutions in practices like no-till farming, cover crops, perennial crops, intercropping, and more. If we grow our food differently, we can restore soil health, make crops more resilient against droughts and floods, and store a lot of carbon. So much carbon that some scientists believe we can not only slow down or stop global heating, but actually reverse it. That sounds too good to be true, but it's certainly worth a shot. Alternative agricultural practices like indigenous agriculture and permaculture aren't just different ways of growing food. They also embody a radical care ethic, one that's concerned with how people and societies can live sustainably and in reciprocity with ecosystems, with each other, and with non-human animals. This care ethic challenges capitalism's extractive and exploitative logic and its norms of ruthless competition and hyper-individualism. But that's a big topic, perhaps best left for a different video. But I will note this. The most distinctively human aspect of human ecology might be agriculture, us growing food from the soil. The very word human derives from humus, which is Latin for soil. In mythology and religion, there are so many stories about humans being created from clay, a type of soil, that there's even a whole Wikipedia article about it. And of course, as I already mentioned, the soil and the worker are the original sources of all wealth, according to Groucho Marx. So if we take good care of the soil, we take good care of ourselves and each other. The soil will save us. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't know how to end this except by saying, I hope you appreciate that I went through this whole video without once saying batshit crazy.
Thank you so much for watching. Before anything else, I want to apologize for the blatant Anglophobia on display in this video. I'm very sorry. I have close friends from Britain and I've talked to them and they tell me that they only do imperialism on Tuesdays now, which is a great improvement. Way to go, Britain. They've also cut back on opium wars to once a year or so, strictly for special occasions. So, the one cheap thing from the excellent book A History of the World in 7 Cheap Things that I didn't make a reference to is care. Care? Do some imperialism and sexism here and there and you got cheap care. That besides, one kind of cheap care you can do is liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. I hope you're having a good day. See you soon, I hope. No pressure. Bye.